The weight of what we don't say. Chapter 1. The anniversary. The restaurant hummed with the kind of forced intimacy that only candlelight and overpriced wine could create. Sarah watched David cut his steak with surgical precision, each slice exactly 1 inch thick, just like everything else in his meticulously ordered life. 23 years of marriage, and she could predict his movements like a choreographed dance she'd grown to hate. "The Hendersons are getting divorced," she said, testing the waters. David didn't look up. Home. Pass the salt. Of course he wouldn't ask why. Of course he wouldn't wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was trying to tell him something. Sarah's fingers tightened around her wine glass until her knuckles went white. The anniversary dinner, their 23rd, stretched ahead of them like a prison sentence. Karen said it was because they stopped talking to each other. Sarah's voice carried an edge that would have been impossible to miss if David had been listening. Really talking, I mean. Karen talks too much anyway. David finally met her eyes, and for a moment, Sarah saw a flicker of the man she'd married. Then it was gone, replaced by the stranger who shared her bed and criticized her grocery choices. This beef is overcooked. There it is, Sarah thought. The complaint. Right on schedule. She smiled the smile she'd perfected over 2 decades. Brittle, accommodating, empty. "I'm sure they'll fix it if you ask." But David had already signaled the waiter. As he launched into his polite but firm critique of the kitchen's shortcomings, Sarah found herself cataloging all the tiny resentments that had built up like sediment in her chest. The way he left his coffee mug on the counter every morning, just inches from the dishwasher. How he corrected her stories at dinner parties. The fact that he'd forgotten to compliment her dress tonight, the red one she'd bought specifically because he once said she looked beautiful in red. When had he last said she looked beautiful? "Ma'am, would you like dessert?" Sarah blinked. The waiter was looking at her expectantly, and David was checking his watch. Always checking his watch, as if their marriage ran on a schedule and he was perpetually behind. "Actually," Sarah heard herself say, "I think I'll have the chocolate souffle and another glass of wine." David frowned. "You know chocolate gives you migraines. Maybe tonight, I don't care." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with 23 years of things left unsaid. For the first time all evening, David really looked at her. Chapter 2. The morning after. Sarah woke with a headache that had nothing to do with the wine. Beside her, David's side of the bed was already cold, the sheets pulled tight in perfect hospital corners. Through the bathroom door, she could hear him gargling mouthwash. Exactly 60 seconds, like his dental hygienist recommended. God, I even resent his oral hygiene. She padded downstairs to find him at the kitchen island, scrolling through his phone while eating steel-cut oats. The coffee maker gurgled, and Sarah's heart lifted slightly. Maybe he'd made her a cup. Maybe this was his way of apologizing for. "You'll need to start a new pot," David said without looking up. "I only made enough for one." The small hope died as quickly as it had bloomed. Sarah stared at the empty carafe, at her husband's indifferent profile, and felt something crystallize inside her chest. Not anger. She'd moved beyond anger years ago. This was something colder, harder. Recognition. "I'm thinking of going to see Mom next week," she said, opening the cabinet for coffee filters. "Tuesday's the HOA meeting. I wasn't planning to take you." David's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Everything," Sarah thought. "It means everything. It means I can drive to Portland by myself. I managed to function for 25 years before I met you." 28. David corrected automatically. "You were 28 when we met." And there it was, the correction that felt like a paper cut. Small, sharp, unnecessary. Sarah poured water into the coffee maker with shaking hands. "Right. 28. How could I forget? You have such a good memory for my shortcomings." "Sarah." David set down his spoon, and she could hear the carefully modulated patience in his voice. The tone he used with difficult clients, with her mother, with her. "I don't know what's wrong with you lately, but..." "What's wrong with me?" The words exploded out of her. "What's wrong with me?" David blinked, startled by her volume. In 23 years, Sarah had raised her voice maybe a dozen times. She was the accommodating one, the peacekeeper, the one who bent herself into impossible shapes to maintain their carefully constructed harmony. "You want to know what's wrong with me, David? I'll tell you what's wrong with me. I'm tired. I'm tired of being corrected and criticized and ignored. I'm tired of feeling like a stranger in my own life. I'm tired of pretending that everything is fine when we both know it's not." She was crying now, angry tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. David sat frozen, his perfect breakfast growing cold, looking at her like she'd sprouted a second head. "I don't understand," he said finally. "We have a good life. We have the house, financial security, we travel. When was the last time you asked me how I feel about anything? Not what I want for dinner or whether I remember to schedule the carpet cleaning, but how I actually feel." The silence stretched between them like a canyon. Sarah could hear the coffee maker finishing its cycle, the refrigerator humming, the sound of their neighbor starting his car in the driveway. Normal morning sounds in their abnormal morning. "I ask you things," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You ask me logistical questions. You treat me like a personal assistant who happens to share your bed." Sarah poured her coffee with deliberate steadiness, and not very enthusiastically at that. David's face flushed red. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "David, we haven't had sex in 4 months. For months. And when I tried to initiate things 2 weeks ago, you told me you were too tired and then stayed up until midnight reading investment reports. I have responsibilities. So do I. I work too. I manage this household. I take care of your mother when she's sick. I organize our social life. I remember everyone's birthdays and anniversaries and preferences. And what do I get in return? What do I get, David?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, looking genuinely lost. "I'll tell you what I get. I get corrected when I tell a story. I get interrupted when I'm talking. I get ignored when I'm right here in front of you. I get taken for granted every single day, and I'm tired of pretending that's love." Sarah grabbed her coffee and headed for the door. "I'm going for a drive. Don't wait up. I might be gone all day." Sarah wait. But she was already gone, leaving David alone with his cold oats and the echo of 23 years of accumulated grievances finally spoken aloud. Chapter 3. The Drive. Sarah drove aimlessly through suburban streets she'd traveled thousands of times, seeing them with new eyes. When had her world become so small? When had she stopped noticing the way morning light caught in the oak trees, or how the Johnsons' garden burst with late summer color? She pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Park, where she and David used to bring their picnic lunches when they were dating. Back when he listened to her opinions about books and movies, when he asked about her dreams, when he made her feel like the most fascinating woman in the world. When did that man disappear? Her phone buzzed. A text from David. "Can we talk when you get home?" Sarah stared at the message for a long time before responding. "About what?" "About us. About this morning. About whatever is happening here. Now you want to talk?" The response came quickly. "I've always wanted to talk. You just never seem to have anything to say." Sarah's hands trembled as she typed. "Because you never gave me the chance to say it." She turned off her phone and walked down to the river. The water moved lazily in the late morning sun, carrying leaves and debris toward some distant destination. She envied those leaves. Their purpose was simple, their direction clear. They didn't have to navigate the complicated terrain of a marriage that had slowly suffocated under the weight of routine and unspoken disappointment. A woman about her age jogged past, earbuds in, face flushed with exertion and something that looked like joy. When was the last time Sarah had felt joy? Really felt it. Not just the pale satisfaction of checking items off a to-do list or the brief pleasure of a well-organized linen closet. She thought about Karen Henderson, filing for divorce after 26 years of marriage. Everyone had been shocked. The Hendersons seemed so solid, so committed. But Sarah understood now. Sometimes the most committed relationships were the ones slowly dying from lack of nourishment. Like plants that got just enough water to survive, but never enough to bloom. Her phone rang. David. She let it go to voicemail, then immediately played the message. "Sarah, His voice sounded different, uncertain. "I keep thinking about what you said this morning, and look, I know I'm not good at this, at talking about feelings and all that, but I don't want you to think I don't care. I do care. I care about you, about us. I don't know how we got here. Come home, okay? Please." For a moment, Sarah felt the old familiar tug, the urge to smooth things over, to pretend her outburst had been an anomaly, to go back to their comfortable, suffocating routine. It would be so much easier than this messy, terrifying honesty. But as she watched the river carry debris toward its destination, she realized she was tired of easy. Easy had brought them to this moment, this crisis, This choice between continuing to pretend or finally telling the truth about what their marriage had become. She called David back. Sarah, where are you? I'm at Riverside Park. Do you remember this place? A pause. Of course. We used to come there when we were dating. Do you remember what we used to talk about? Another pause, longer this time. We talked about everything. Books, movies, your job at the magazine, my dreams of starting my own firm. We talked about having kids. Sarah, we talked about traveling to Italy, about getting a dog, about all the things we were going to do together. When was the last time we talked about our dreams, David? When was the last time you asked me what I wanted out of life? Silence on the other end of the line. Sarah could picture him in their kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of their carefully constructed life. The granite countertops they'd spent months selecting, the professional-grade appliances he insisted they needed, the family photos arranged just so on the built-in shelves. I thought. David's voice was quiet. I thought we were living our dreams. The house, financial security, respect in our careers. Those are goals, David. Achievements. They're not dreams. Sarah felt tears starting again. A dream is something that makes you feel alive just thinking about it. When was the last time either of us felt truly alive? The question hung between them, unanswered and unanswerable. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. When Sarah returned home, she found David in his study, surrounded by photo albums she hadn't seen in years. He looked up when she entered, and she was startled by the raw vulnerability in his eyes. I've been looking through these, he said, gesturing to the scattered memories, trying to figure out when we stopped being us. Sarah sat down across from him, picking up a photo from their second anniversary. They were at the beach, her hair wild from the wind, both of them laughing at something just outside the frame. They looked so young, so unguarded, so hopeful. Look at us, she whispered. I know. I can barely remember feeling like that. They sat in silence, surrounded by the ghosts of their younger selves. Sarah found herself studying David's face, looking for traces of the man who used to wake her up with coffee and croissants on Sunday mornings, who wrote her long letters when he traveled for work, who once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm just to bring her soup when she had the flu. What happened to us, David? He was quiet for so long that she wondered if he'd heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with something she'd rarely heard from him, uncertainty. I think I stopped trying to deserve you. Sarah's breath caught. What? When we first met, I knew I was lucky. You were this incredible woman, smart, funny, passionate about everything. You made me want to be better than I was. He picked up another photo, this one from their engagement party. I used to work so hard to impress you, to make you laugh, to show you how much you meant to me. You did impress me. You made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. And then we got married, and I thought I could relax. I thought I'd won you, so I didn't have to keep trying. David's hands shook slightly as he set down the photo. I got comfortable, lazy. I started taking you for granted because you were always there, always patient, always understanding. I was understanding because I loved you, because I believed in us. And I stopped believing we needed work. I treated our marriage like a business that was running smoothly. As long as the bills were paid and nothing was broken, everything must be fine. He looked at her directly for the first time in what felt like months. But I was wrong, wasn't I? Just because something isn't broken doesn't mean it's healthy. Sarah felt something loosening in her chest. Not quite forgiveness, but the possibility of it. I stopped trying too. I got so focused on being the perfect wife that I forgot to be myself. I stopped telling you what I really thought, what I really wanted, because it was easier to just go along. What do you really want, Sarah? The question was so simple, so direct, that it took her breath away. When was the last time anyone had asked her that? When was the last time she'd even asked herself? I want. She struggled to find the words. I want to feel like myself again. I want to have conversations that matter. I want to be seen, really seen, not just as your wife or the woman who manages our household, but as me, Sarah, the woman who loves obscure poetry and terrible reality TV and dreams of learning to paint watercolors. You want to paint? Sarah laughed, wiping tears from her cheeks. See? You don't even know me anymore. I bought watercolor supplies 6 months ago. They're still in the bag in the hall closet. David was quiet for a moment. I don't know who I am anymore either. I've become this person who corrects your stories and complains about overcooked beef and treats every conversation like a business meeting. He rubbed his face with both hands. I don't like who I've become, Sarah. I don't like the man who makes you feel invisible. Then change. Is it that simple? No. Sarah's voice was steady. It's not simple at all. It means admitting that we've both been sleepwalking through our marriage. It means being uncomfortable and vulnerable and honest about things we've been avoiding for years. It means risking everything we've built on the chance that we might be able to build something better. David reached across the space between them and took her hand. His fingers were warm, familiar, and for the first time in months, his touch didn't feel automatic. I'm scared, he admitted. Of what? Of trying and failing. Of discovering that we're too broken to fix. Of losing you completely. His grip tightened. But I'm more scared of continuing like this. Of waking up in 10 years and realizing we've wasted even more time being strangers who happen to share an address. Sarah looked at their joined hands, thinking about the weight of 23 years. All the small kindnesses and tiny cruelties, the shared jokes and long silences. The way love could transform so gradually from passion to comfort to habit to resentment without either person noticing until it was almost too late. We need help, she said finally. Professional help. We can't fix this alone. We've been trying to fix it alone for years, and look where it's gotten us. David nodded. Couples therapy. And individual therapy too. We both need to figure out who we are outside of this marriage before we can figure out who we want to be inside it. Okay. His voice was barely above a whisper. What if? What if we realize we don't want to be anything inside it? Sarah met his eyes, seeing her own fear reflected there. Then at least we'll know. At least we'll have tried everything before we give up. They sat holding hands in the gathering darkness, surrounded by photographs of who they used to be, contemplating the terrifying possibility of who they might become. Chapter 5, Small Steps. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in Dr. Elizabeth Chin's office, trying to explain 23 years of accumulated disappointment to a stranger with kind eyes and a notepad. When you think about your marriage, Dr. Chin said, what's the first emotion that comes up? Tired, Sarah answered immediately. I feel tired. Can you say more about that? Sarah twisted her wedding ring, feeling its familiar weight. She'd never taken it off, not once in 23 years. I feel tired of trying to be understood. Tired of feeling like I'm speaking a language David doesn't recognize. Tired of being angry about things that seem so small when I say them out loud, but feel so big when I'm living them. Give me an example of something that feels small but big. Last Tuesday, I made dinner. Salmon, his favorite. I spent an hour preparing it, set the table with the good plates, lit candles. When he came home, the first thing he said was that I'd forgotten to buy milk for his morning coffee. Sarah's voice caught. Not, thank you for dinner, or this looks nice, or even just hello, how was your day? The first words out of his mouth were a criticism about something I'd forgotten to do. Dr. Chin nodded. How did that make you feel? Invisible. Like nothing I do matters unless it affects his convenience. Sarah paused. But then I feel guilty for being upset about it, because it's such a small thing. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He probably didn't even realize how it sounded. Impact versus intent, Dr. Chin said. His intent may have been neutral, but the impact on you was significant. Both of those things can be true at the same time. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening she hadn't expected. I've been telling myself that my feelings don't matter because his intentions aren't malicious. What would happen if you honored your feelings regardless of his intentions? The question terrified her. Sarah had spent so many years managing her emotional responses to David's behavior, calibrating her reactions to keep the peace, that she'd almost forgotten her feelings were valid independent of his approval. I don't know, she admitted. I've been his accommodating wife for so long. I'm not sure who I'd be if I stopped. Who were you before you became his accommodating wife? Sarah closed her eyes, trying to remember. I was bolder, I think. I had opinions about things. I argued about books and politics and art. I took chances. I once quit a job because my boss was treating me badly. I didn't have another job lined up. I just walked out because I knew I deserved better. What happened to that woman? She got tired of fighting. She learned that it was easier to bend than to stand her ground, especially when standing her ground meant conflict, and conflict meant David would withdraw and sulk for days. Sarah opened her eyes. I traded my voice for peace. But it wasn't really peace, was it? It was just silence. Dr. Chin smiled. What do you think that woman? The one who quit the job, who had strong opinions, who took chances. What do you think she would say about your marriage? Sarah didn't have to think about her answer. She'd say I deserved better. She'd say love shouldn't require me to disappear. Meanwhile, 2 hours later and across town, David sat in his own therapist's office, struggling with his own revelations. I think I've been emotionally lazy, he told Dr. Marcus Torres. For years. Maybe decades. Tell me what you mean by that. David stared out the window, watching pedestrians hurry past on the sidewalk below. Everyone seemed to have somewhere important to go, something urgent to do. When was the last time he'd felt that kind of purpose? I think I assumed that because Sarah never complained, everything was fine. I think I mistook her silence for contentment, when really, I think she was just tired of trying to be heard. What do you think changed? Why is she speaking up now? I don't know. Maybe she finally reached her limit. Maybe 23 years of being taken for granted was enough. David's voice was heavy with regret. The terrible thing is, I do love her. I've always loved her. But somewhere along the way, I stopped showing it. I stopped trying to earn it. What does it mean to you, to earn love? When we were dating, I worked to make her happy. I paid attention to what she liked, what made her laugh, what she was passionate about. I brought her books I thought she'd enjoy, planned surprises, asked her questions because I genuinely wanted to know her answers. David felt tears threatening. When was the last time I asked my wife a question because I was genuinely curious about her answer? Dr. Torres waited, letting the question hang in the air. I can't remember, David whispered. I honestly can't remember. What do you think happened? I think I started taking her love for granted. I stopped seeing it as something precious that needed to be nurtured and started seeing it as something I owned, something that would always be there no matter how I behaved. He shook his head. I treated our marriage like a trust fund, something I could draw from indefinitely without ever making deposits. And now I'm afraid the account is empty. I'm afraid I've withdrawn so much love and given back so little that there's nothing left to work with. Dr. Torres leaned forward slightly. David, what would it look like to start making deposits again? The question caught him off guard. In all his worry about what he'd lost, he hadn't really considered what he might still be able to give. I guess I could start paying attention again. Really paying attention. Not just to what she does for me, but to who she is. What she thinks about, what she dreams about, what makes her happy. What else? I could stop correcting her. God, I do that constantly, don't I? She'll tell a story about something that happened at work, and I'll interrupt to fix some tiny detail that doesn't even matter. Why do I do that? What do you think? David considered this. Control, maybe? Or maybe I think I'm being helpful, but really I'm just diminishing her. Making myself feel important by making her feel small. The realization hit him like a physical blow. I've been making my wife feel small. What kind of husband does that? The kind who's human and flawed and capable of change, Dr. Torres said gently. The question is, what kind of husband do you want to be going forward? That evening, David came home to find Sarah in the kitchen, but instead of starting dinner, she was setting up an easel. Her watercolor supplies were spread across the island, brushes and paints and thick paper that caught the light from the pendant lamps above. You're painting, he said, and immediately wished he could take back the obvious observation. Sarah looked up, and he could see wariness in her eyes, as if she was bracing for criticism. Dr. Chun suggested I start doing things that make me feel like myself again. David felt a stab of pain at her defensive tone, at the way she held herself like she expected him to object. What are you painting? I don't know yet. I thought I'd just see what happens. He wanted to say something supportive, something that would show her he was trying to change, but the words felt clumsy in his mouth. Instead, he moved closer, watching as she dipped a brush in water and then in a pool of golden yellow paint. The light is beautiful here in the evening, he said, and meant it. Sarah glanced at him, surprised. It is. I've been thinking about painting this light for months. Why didn't you? She paused, brush halfway to paper. Because there was always something else to do. Dinner to make, laundry to fold, bills to organize. And because I was afraid you'd think it was frivolous. A waste of time. The honesty hit him like a slap. Sarah, I would never. You might not say it directly, but I'd see it in your face. The way you look at me when I'm doing something you think is unproductive. She turned back to her painting, making a bold stroke of yellow across the white paper. I know all your expressions, David. I've been reading them for 23 years. He wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. She was right. He did have opinions about how time should be spent, and he wasn't always good at hiding his judgment when he thought someone was being inefficient or impractical. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I made you feel like you couldn't pursue something that makes you happy." Sarah's brush stilled. She looked at him again, and this time he saw something softer in her expression. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of cautious hope. "I made salmon," she said. "It's in the oven." "Thank you. That sounds perfect." They stood there for a moment, watching golden paint bloom across white paper, both of them learning how to navigate this new territory of honesty and effort and the fragile possibility of change. Chapter 6. The Work. 6 months into therapy, Sarah and David sat in Dr. Chen's office for their first joint session. The neutral space felt safer somehow, removed from the accumulated history of their home and all its loaded spaces. "I'd like you each to share one thing you've learned about yourself in individual therapy," Dr. Chen said. "Sarah?" Sarah took a breath. "I've learned that I have a voice, and that using it isn't cruel or selfish. For years, I thought being a good wife meant never making David uncomfortable with my needs or opinions. But I've realized that by trying to be easy to love, I made myself impossible to know." David shifted in his chair, and Sarah could see he was struggling not to interrupt, not to explain or defend. She appreciated the effort. "David, I've learned that love isn't a static thing you achieve and then stop working on. I thought marriage was like buying a house. Once you signed the papers, it belonged to you, and you could stop trying to earn it." He looked directly at Sarah. "I've learned that I confused ownership with partnership, and that I stopped seeing Sarah as a person with her own inner life because I was so focused on how she fit into mine." Dr. Chen nodded. "Those are significant insights. Now, I want to try an exercise. Sarah, I'd like you to tell David about something you're passionate about, something that has nothing to do with him or your marriage. David, your job is to listen with curiosity, to ask questions, to try to understand why this thing matters to her." Sarah felt suddenly shy. When was the last time she talked about her interests without filtering them through David's potential reactions? "I've been reading about urban beekeeping," she said, then immediately cringed. It sounded so random, so trivial. But David didn't roll his eyes or look bored. Instead, he leaned forward slightly. "Urban beekeeping? I know it sounds crazy, but I've been fascinated by it. The way bees communicate through dance, how they make collective decisions about where to build their hive, how a single colony can support thousands of individuals while maintaining this incredible organization." Sarah felt herself warming to the subject. There's something beautiful about the idea of creating sweetness in the middle of the city, of giving bees a sanctuary in all that concrete and chaos. "Have you thought about trying it?" The question was so simple, so free of judgment, that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "I've looked into it. There are classes, regulations to follow, equipment to buy. It would be expensive to get started and time-consuming, and I wasn't sure." "What weren't you sure about?" "Whether you'd think it was ridiculous, whether you'd be supportive or just see it as another one of my impractical hobbies." David was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, I don't want you to stop pursuing things you're passionate about because you're afraid of my reaction. That's not the kind of husband I want to be. But you do have reactions. We both do. And over the years, I've learned to read them and adjust my behavior accordingly. Then I need to be more aware of my reactions and more supportive, even when I don't immediately understand something." He paused. "Tell me more about the bees." For the next 20 minutes, Sarah talked about bee behavior and hive dynamics, and the declining bee population and the role of urban beekeeping in conservation efforts. David asked questions, real questions, not the leading ones designed to steer the conversation in a particular direction. He listened like her answers mattered, like she was teaching him something valuable. When she finally stopped talking, she felt lighter than she had in months. "How did that feel?" Dr. Chen asked. "Amazing," Sarah said. "Like I exist as more than just David's wife or the person who manages our household. Like I'm actually interesting." "You are interesting," David said quietly. "I forgot how interesting you are. I forgot to stay curious about you." Dr. Chen turned to David. "Your turn. Tell Sarah about something you're passionate about." David looked uncomfortable. "I don't know if I'm passionate about anything anymore." "What did you used to be passionate about?" "Before work and responsibilities took over." "Architecture," David said immediately. "Not just commercial development, but real architecture. Buildings that serve communities, that create spaces for people to connect and thrive. His voice grew stronger. I used to drive around the city looking at interesting buildings, studying how they interacted with their neighborhoods. I had this dream of designing affordable housing that was actually beautiful, not just functional. Sarah stared at him. I had no idea you felt that way. I stopped talking about it because it seemed impractical. We have bills to pay, a lifestyle to maintain. Commercial development is stable, profitable. But sometimes I see a piece of creative architecture and I feel this ache, like I gave up something important. What would it look like to reconnect with that passion? I don't know. Maybe taking some design courses, joining architecture groups, visiting buildings that inspire me. Maybe even exploring whether there's a way to gradually transition my practice toward more meaningful projects. Sarah reached across the space between them and took his hand. I'd like to hear about the buildings that inspire you. I'd like to understand what you see when you look at good architecture. Really, I want to know what makes you come alive. They sat holding hands, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was looking at her husband rather than the stranger who had replaced him. This is beautiful, Dr. Chin said. But I want to acknowledge that this feeling, this connection, it's going to be fragile for a while. You're both going to have moments when you fall back into old patterns, when you stop seeing each other clearly, when resentment creeps back in. The key is catching it quickly and course correcting. What does that look like practically? David asked. It looks like check-ins. Regular conversations about how you're feeling in the relationship, not just what you're doing. It looks like continuing to pursue individual interests while also investing in shared ones. It looks like remembering that love is a practice, not a feeling you achieve and then coast on. Sarah nodded. And it looks like being willing to have difficult conversations when things feel off, instead of letting them build up until they explode. Or until they kill you slowly with silence, David added. They scheduled their next appointment and walked to their cars in companionable quiet. At Sarah's car, David hesitated. Would you like to grab dinner somewhere? Not because it's our usual night out, but because I'd like to keep talking. About bees, about architecture, about whatever. Sarah smiled, the first genuinely happy smile she'd given him in months. I'd like that, but somewhere with terrible acoustics and overpriced wine, so we have to lean close to hear each other. The kind of place where people fall in love. The kind of place where people remember why they fell in love. Epilogue. 1 year later, Sarah knelt in their backyard, adjusting the entrance to her first beehive. The afternoon sun slanted through the apple tree David had planted last spring, not because they needed more fruit, but because he'd read that bees loved apple blossoms. How are they doing? David asked, settling onto the garden bench with 2 glasses of iced tea. Active. Happy, I think. Sarah pulled off her protective gear and joined him. The queen is laying eggs, the workers are bringing in pollen, and they've started building comb in the upper frames. All good signs. I still can't believe you're doing this. 6 months ago, if someone had told me my wife would become an urban beekeeper, I would have laughed. 6 months ago, if someone had told me you